Welcome back to Capital Conversations with Rachel and Lauren. It's been a couple weeks, and I think I could speak for both of us that we were exhausted, and so it's nice to have some time off.
Yeah, we're so excited to be back. Obviously, we're both at home. We're not in our usual studios, but we had to bring y'all some news before these 3 weeks kick off, before the Christmas break.
Which is kind of crazy because we had this whole government shutdown, and truthfully, like the House wasn't doing much, so there wasn't much that
Mm.
we had to do in comparison to our Senate colleagues who were really just like running themselves ragged. But I think like once the government shutdown ended, everybody like breathed like a sigh of relief, but then everybody was so dead from just the constant just back and forth of not knowing what was going to happen. And so now that we're here and Thanksgiving is over, now we have only this short amount of time to shove so much in before, next year.
Yeah, I mean, there's a ton to do. They just added another session day on December 19th, which is Friday before Christmas, which is a crazy day for the House to be working. But I think that it's gonna be a pretty fast-paced few weeks.
And I think when you look back over the last couple weeks when we were in absentia, I think the biggest thing that happened was the fact that Marjorie Taylor Greene is no longer going to be a member of Congress come January 5th.
I can't even imagine a political world or being in Washington without Marjorie Taylor Greene. Like she's been there the entirety of the times that we've been there. I was sitting in Wicked. I was watching Wicked whenever I got the notification.
A fabulous movie.
So great. We could have a whole podcast talking about our review of Wicked, but that's not what you're here for.
Ha!
But I got the notification and I was so distracted, not distracted the whole movie, but I got it like as the movie was starting and I was like, no way. Like this is crazy. She is so detrimental to the Republican Party in Washington, just like as a loud voice and as somebody who has
Mhm.
often spoke for the president, somebody who was one of the closest allies of the president on Capitol Hill for a period in time until recently when she made a good amount of splits on foreign policy and with Epstein and with the government shutdown. She was really outspoken about the House being out of session, like we just talked about, and kind of going against Mike Johnson's decision to keep them away. I wouldn't say that she's ever been the biggest advocate of Speaker Mike Johnson, but she has
No.
always been a really staunch supporter of President Trump. She has said, even to this day, that she was a Trump supporter from day one, but the president has really been coming after her. And I know that we've done a lot on political violence. We saw Congressman Jared Golden announce retirement for safety reasons for his family. And I know that Marjorie cited a lot of safety reasons in her 4-page letter that she posted. And I think that whenever Trump posts go or like post against somebody, like their death threats significantly increase, regardless
Mhm.
of if they're a Republican or a Democrat.
Yeah, and I thought what was so interesting that you bring that up is like so when I found out about it, I was literally about to take off. Like I was about to turn my phone on airplane mode, and all of a sudden it was ding ding ding, friends texting me like, "Oh my gosh, is it true that she's leaving?" And I was like, "No." And then I looked on my phone and yep, sure enough, 4-page manifesto about how she's so disappointed in the Republican Party. And the thing about the safety reasons, I was sitting with my family the other day. And my mom had brought up, she was like, well, wasn't she the one that said that, like, if she dies mysteriously, she wants everyone to know that she didn't kill herself?
Yeah,
Like,
I remember when she posted that. I
and that
remember.
was so crazy when she said that because it was
Yeah.
very just out of the blue. She was like splitting with Trump a little bit at the time, but it wasn't enough to have something of that caliber out there. And then just from there, it started spiraling to where she was breaking with him on so many different things that you had Democrats being like, wait, like we agree with Marjorie Taylor
Yeah.
Greene. When did this happen?
I had ranking member of House Oversight, ranking member Garcia, talk about how he would work with Marjorie if she's somebody that's going to be willing to work with them across the aisle,
Oh,
which is
yeah.
something that we never would have heard even 6 months ago, maybe even 3 months ago. But I remember when she posted that and was like, I'm not suicidal. Because you see a lot of these conspiracy theorists post stuff like that, like people who are talking about politics and maybe
Hmm.
a way that the parties don't align with. You see Candace Owens posting a lot of stuff like that.
Yeah.
And so I think that seeing that coming from a member of Congress was pretty jarring, especially just with her stepping away from the typical norms of what Republicans are talking about and talking about it pretty loudly. Like she has a big platform. I would say she arguably say that she has one of the biggest platforms in the
Oh,
Republican.
yeah.
And so for her to say that was kind of a wake up call. I know that we've reported a lot on member safety, but member safety is more than quadrupled in recent years, or even in the last year. Like I was looking at statistics, and I think that it doubled from like 2024, 2023 to this year. And so I think that, I mean, they're facing severe threats, and especially whenever it comes to stuff like the Epstein files, we've seen these victims be terrified to come out and like talk about clients who were possibly involved with Epstein for possible reasons of like what they say is being sued into homelessness. And I mean, I'm sure that she's facing similar threats that a lot of these people have for anything like
Mhm.
defamation, or even going against the president. Like the president's supporters support him so wholeheartedly that they don't love when somebody splits from the president.
Yeah, and I think it's curious to see what this is going to do for the rest of the Republican conference because what you've seen is that like Trump is their leader, right? As opposed to Democrats who don't really have a leader. We've seen Democrats kind of split into these different factions. But you don't see on the Democratic side like these factions really warring against each other as aggressively as you see Trump Republicans against non-Trump Republicans. Like I would argue that that is just a much stronger, more aggressive infighting war than you see on the Democratic side. I think a lot of that is because Trump is their national leader. And
Yes.
because they have this trifecta, they they think that they have to do everything in line with Trump. And a
Yeah.
lot of them would argue that that's the way to pass their agenda, to get stuff through the House, to get stuff through the Senate, to get to his desk.
Yeah.
But when you start to see Trump, and this is what Marjorie Taylor Greene cited in her, manifesto basically, that there are things that Trump promised and he is now breaking down
Yeah.
and not fulfilling those things that he said he was going to do on the campaign trail and what he said, at those rallies with House members who were in tight races who needed his endorsement to win or things like that. And so I'm curious to see how if MTG is just going to be the first of many staunch Trump Republicans who start to deteriorate away from that because a lot of Republicans have said, "Hey, you were going to be so focused on domestic policy. You
Yeah.
promised to do that, and all you're doing is flying overseas." And a lot of Republicans have said that, both privately and publicly. And so I think that a lot of people, and especially leadership for Republicans, are saying, Marjorie Taylor Greene is an outsider. She's just mad that Trump wouldn't support, her Senate bid.
Yeah.
But I think also it's a sign that just because Trump is the leader doesn't mean that his iron will is absolute, especially if Republicans really threw their whole weight behind him and then
Mhm.
he's, reneging on those promises that he made. And so I think that that's a problem for Mike Johnson because he has been virtually at the will of President Trump. I mean, and we've talked about this. Trump has said like, I'm the Congress and the White House. And I saw some,
And I mean, he treats it as if
he treats it as it.
passes any executive order through anything that could have been passed through Congress. He has a majority in the House, he has a majority in the Senate, and he could be passing things through Congress, but this has been a relatively slow Congress in terms of legislation being passed because he's doing everything through executive orders. Like he
Right.
really takes it upon himself and his White House to do everything, and I think that that could is like eventually rub Congress the wrong way. Like we're only a year in, we still have 3 more years, and like
Mhm.
these members like to have like a grasp on certain policies that they have that allotted to them. We've seen frustration with tariffs, with Don Bacon and some other more moderate Republicans. But I
Yeah.
think it's going to get to a point where Trump is a lame duck president and these members are frustrated that they're not allowed to do their job because the White House is essentially doing it for them through stuff like executive orders.
Well, and also, yeah, Trump is here for 3 more years, but it is quite possible that there's only one more year of a
Yeah.
Republican majority in the House. And that's what Marjorie Taylor Greene cited in her thing as well, is that Republicans are behaving, is what she's saying. And honestly, I kind of agree with her. They're behaving as if they have all this time in the world to get
Yeah.
stuff done. But what they're not realizing is that the 2026 midterms are very close. And
Mhm.
Democrats well, not even, I shouldn't say Democrats, the party opposite of the White House
Yeah.
historically does better in the midterms. Democrats also historically, just in general, do better in the midterms because Republicans don't come out in droves for non-presidential years like Democrats do. So if Republicans only have a year to get stuff done, and then don't forget that there's only like 3 working weeks left for
Yeah.
this year, beginning of next year, it's going to be spending, funding central for they're
Yeah.
trying to pass the funding bill on January 31st. So at that point, you're already into February. the schedule just came out. There's considerable days, but the House loves to cancel votes. So
Yeah.
I think that what a lot of members are going to be starting to stress about and worry is, like you said, it's been a slow year for the House, for Congress in general. You can only really point to a few pieces of strong legislation that
Mhm.
really tackled the needs of the American people that Republicans said they were going to fix. And
Yeah.
so I think that that's the problem. And that's what Mike Johnson has a real, issue that he needs to tackle is, how long is he just going to let Trump walk over him? Like, how long is he going to, hold back and wait for the president to make an opinion on a bill before
Mhm.
he brings it forward, which we're seeing with the discharge petitions.
Yeah, I mean, we're seeing that with Russian sanctions, which is going to be a discharge petition, or I mean, already is from
Yeah.
Brian Fitzpatrick. But like, that's something that rank and file members and members on these foreign policy committees want to be working on. We're seeing like massive movement on that between members in the House and the Senate. And Thune and Johnson just kind of seem at a standstill. They're like, we want to let the White House take care of this, but Congress is like, no, like we want to do something about this. And you're seeing
Because
that.
it's our job. Like Congress is like, it's our job to do this. It has been this way for years. It's in the Constitution that this is our job. And you're seeing this and I've talked about this a lot in my writing, but also just on our show, is that you've really seen an erosion of House rules and procedure. And
Last
whether that's party infighting or
few
whether
weeks.
that's from Trump, it's just like you're seeing this whole breakdown that it's very concerning, I think, for a lot of Republican members who want to see that their legislative branch is still in control and they still have the power. And it's like, how do you balance that between going against your national leader, but then also, working for your constituents and trying to, lower the things that you said you were going to lower to get reelected in 2026. And right now they don't have much of a, call sheet to reference.
And I mean, it's also such a hard balance. Like, these members could disagree and think that the legislative branch needs more power, but the second they speak up about that, like Marjorie Taylor Greene, you start getting attacked by Trump on Truth Social. And I mean,
Mhm.
that Trump endorsement is crucial to a lot of these members in a lot of these districts. I think that obviously pretty Republican districts, like some of them are safe without a Trump endorsement, but a lot of
Yeah.
them rely on that Trump endorsement to get their election across the finish line. But I mean, much less 2026 midterms, Speaker Johnson has kind of a big chance on losing any vote margin in the House.
Yeah.
Congressman Mark Green's special election coming up tomorrow. We have Sylvester Turner's special election in January as well in Texas, and that will be filled by a Democrat almost guaranteed. We have
Yeah.
Cheryl's election in New Jersey because she's going to be governor. And so I think that once these Democratic seats get filled, and if Mark Green's seat tomorrow, by miracle, it is almost positively going to be a Republican that fills that seat. But there's
Yeah.
the slight off chance that Democrats just really show out and flip that seat. Johnson will be at a no seat margin. He could lose no votes to pass legislation, and that is pretty much like nobody has the majority at that point.
No, and also a zero vote margin is not feasible for Johnson to do anything because you already have one member, Thomas Massey, who pretty much votes against anything major, especially when it comes to spending or funding. He is a no immediately. So you're already done. At that point, you're already done. So
Yeah.
when you have this special election tomorrow, let's say the Democrat wins. And we can get into, the specifics of that election in a little bit, but like just objectively, if she wins, you
Hmm.
know, that leading into January, the January 31st deadline, he's going to have a tiny margin right before you have to pass another. Well, they would love to say that they're going to pass all 12, the remaining of the 12 appropriations bills. Will they do that? Who's to say? Could we see another CR? Maybe.
Right.
But again, you have to pass that CR with a majority. If Thomas Massey's already going to be a no, I just think that with Marjorie Taylor Greene leaving, that just kind of puts such a damper on what Johnson can do. And I think it forces maybe him in leadership to look inward and think, how do we rein back in the power of the legislative branch to appease not only the moderates who have already been chomping at the bit to do something like you mentioned with sanctions, but also for some of my, conservative fiscal hawks who, like Marjorie Taylor Greene, are like, we're out. Like you're seeing
Yeah.
Chip Roy leaving. Chip Roy has said, and he's leaving at the end. He's not like resigning early, but his
Different
reasons
people.
for leaving
No.
are,
Yes.
legislative branch not working, House not working. It's dysfunctional up here. I'm going to go back to my state and do some real work. I think that you're going to see a lot of members. It doesn't matter what side of the conservative spectrum that you're on. I
Yeah.
think that with the way that Trump and Johnson and Thune are kind of just in this little bubble, I think that that's really going to hurt members and their ability to do any work at all. Because then come 2026, what are you going to have to show for it? Nothing.
Yeah. And I mean, you're seeing major members leave on both sides of the political
Yeah.
spectrum. On for Democrats and Republicans, I think that they're just frustrated that the legislative branch doesn't have the same power that they used to. Like you named Chip Roy, we just named Marjorie Taylor Greene. We're seeing Ralph Norman in South
Mhm.
Carolina is running for governor. We're seeing Nancy Mace. Those are two major voices and major, I mean, Ralph Norman's a major fiscal hawk. Nancy Mace is also just like a major player in the media.
Yeah.
We're seeing Congressman Jared Golden on the Democratic side. We're seeing Nancy Pelosi. Like these major members are leaving because I think that they are just frustrated that they feel like they're spending so much time away from family, so much time in Washington to get nothing done. Like, and I'm not just saying this Congress. Last Congress, I mean, the House was held by Republicans, but it was a Democratic president. One of the
Hmm.
least productive Congresses in history. So it's not just this Congress. I think that we're seeing an erosion of the legislative branch just in general, and I think that that's causing major frustrations with a lot of the big players.
Yeah, and I think I remember when I was working on an article and it was about just how partisan the Congress is and why, the legislative branch has just become so like eroded in the way that it's able to do things. And a lot of it is because you are seeing these really, really narrow margins. And so
Yeah,
I
totally.
think if you look back, you see the bigger margins. Obviously, Republicans or Democrats were able to pass things, at least in the House with ease. Senate always has that filibuster, so they're kind of another story. But, for our purposes, I
That's
think that
not our
the
problem.
more yeah, literally. I think the more partisan that Congress becomes, I think the more problems that we're going to see, especially when it's, Johnson doesn't have the wiggle room to appease everybody. And
Yeah,
so right now he has to appease the one person that he has to, and that's Trump. And so what that does is, and a lot of times, the conservative fiscal hawks are totally on board. And
mhm,
they've considered Johnson to be the most conservative speaker they've ever had. But then you're also seeing within that little conference, Anna Paulina Luna pissed off because of the stock trading bill, that members on both sides, large droves of Democrats, Republicans
yeah,
want this bill on the floor.
yeah.
Johnson could put it up for a vote
And it would pass. I
and
like
it would pass.
it would
And
pass.
I don't, and I think that what a lot of people are wondering is like, why? Epstein Files was different because Epstein Files was really like a potentially politically damaging vote for Republicans to put
Yeah.
that on the floor, right? It ended up passing unanimously almost. Like it was almost just kind of like I think it did pass unanimously. Like
There
it
was,
just
yeah, one vote,
one
which
vote. Like it just was kind of like a oh to the end of like this built up saga that we were in. But the stock, and so you understood a little bit why Johnson wasn't bringing that to the floor because Trump was really vocal on it. But the stock trading bill is something that like it's not sanctioned, so it's not something really targeting the president at all. But you're seeing this bill that has bipartisan support. That's the purpose of Congress is to work together to make lives better for people. This could be a perfect opportunity to do so, and
yeah.
leadership isn't taking that opportunity. And so you have his conservative fiscal hawks who are pro-Trump, who want to see, the most conservative policies passed ever, breaking from him and speaking out against him. So it's like that control that he has over the conference just kind of seems to be like falling apart a little bit.
Yeah. I think discharge position for stock trade is so hard because like you said, like I mean, I think the Epstein story would have been completely different if Trump didn't come out and endorse the bill mere days, hours before. I think that
Yeah.
that completely changed turnout. I think it would have passed with flying colors, if not two-thirds majority. I don't think it would have been anywhere near unanimous like it
No,
was.
I agree.
I think stock trade is so hard, which I'm going to be fascinated to follow this if it does turn into a discharge petition that gets introduced, because it is still going to be a hard vote for some of his members that are crucial in keeping the majority if
Hmm.
they keep it in 26. Like we have John Bresnahan, who has had lots of stories come out about stock trading. He is one of the most um, like that is one of the most competitive seats in Pennsylvania. And so
Yeah.
I think that that is a hard vote for a lot of his members. And I think that if the discharge petition does hit 218 signatures, like that is not going to be a great look for leadership. And like you said, like with that leadership slipping, if he is already slipping and losing support and then also loses the House in the midterms, it'll be really interesting to see if Johnson is still the person that the caucus wants to be their leader, especially with Trump as a lame duck president and him
Mhm.
so staunchly standing behind everything that Trump says and just like doing what Trump thinks and having his members follow in that lead. I think that it'll be interesting to see if he keeps his leadership next year, with all of this kind of falling apart, but also coming together.
No, yeah, I agree with you. And I think we've talked about before that, Trump's the most power that he's going to have is this year and next year. After that, if he's on his way out. And so Republicans have to make a decision. Are we going to be in line with Trump for the rest of our lives? Or are we going to start to separate ourselves from him and start to look forward to the future, to the next Republican leader of our party? And so I think that you're right. I think that once 2026 midterms, if the Republicans flip to the minority, I think that, leadership race is going to be very interesting to see if they still want Johnson. I mean, MTG won't be there, but like, MTG's never been his biggest fan. A lot of members have even said that, like, I think that a lot of conservatives have said they really like Mike Johnson as a person. They like that he comes and brings everybody to the table. He likes to have discussions. He's very patient. And I think even with reporters, you can argue
Yeah,
that he's a very patient speaker. He answers questions. He makes himself available,
doesn't
and
really
that's
snap.
great.
He rarely gets frustrated.
No, he's very even keeled.
Yeah.
And so I think that that's something that Republicans really have respected, both moderates and, more further to the right conservatives. But there will come a point of, okay, well, now we're in the minority potentially, if this is the end of 26. Like, do we still keep up with Trump's, far right conservative movement? Or do we try to shift ourselves back to the middle to try
Mhm.
to get some of our stuff done to work with Democrats? And
Yeah.
that dysfunction of the House has been something that's been, in shambles for a very long time. But I think I'm curious to see with Trump on his way out how those dynamics are going to shift.
I also think that a lot of Republicans, not only in the House, but just in general, do appreciate a speaker and a leader that has no personal baggage. I'm not saying that nothing could ever come out, but to this
Right.
there has been no personal baggage. Obviously, former Speaker McCarthy had personal baggage. Clearly,
Yes.
Trump has personal baggage, but he is a leader that is pretty like you said, even keeled, but also doesn't come with that like, is something going to come out about him? Is there like
He's just
baggage?
like a normal guy.
Yeah, and like he has kids. He's from Louisiana, was a rank and file member for the most part, and like I do think that that is something that appeals to him being in leadership. But
Mhm.
who knows if he'll hold on to it if they lose the majority in 26.
And that's what I think a lot of us are wondering is now let's say that they keep the majority and we're in, the start of 2027. Is Johnson going to still be speaker?
I think so.
I think
Personally,
so. I
I
think
think
that
if they keep the majority, he is a very high chance.
I think he's set. I think the only thing that would maybe make things harder for him is it depends on how Democrats perform
Yeah,
in the 2026 midterms. Because if they get rid of if they shrink the margin basically any more than the three that it would be at a full like I'm curious to see if he'll continue, if he'll keep the gavel with flying colors,
yeah,
or if the behavior of the 2026 year and the end of this year, if that's going to impact them. Because again, are members going to be looking at it, okay, do we want this speaker, do we want this guy to be the leader of our party post-Trump?
yeah,
I think and we can do a lot of retrospect, and well, I guess we won't know until we're there, but I think that a lot of members before MTG, and
hmm,
maybe a little bit even, or no, I would say after MTG, but maybe a little bit before, they weren't thinking of a post-Trump world. For them, they're thinking, okay, like this is it, like Trump's our
yeah,
guy.
yeah,
We're not going anywhere else. But I think that now with MTG, I think that was almost like a calling card for them to be like, oh, like if this can happen to her, this could happen to us. And
yeah,
are we comfortable with the fact that one false move can get us ostracized from the party? I mean,
yeah.
that's not something we can answer, but I'm curious to see if other chips just start to fall after this.
Yeah. And I mean, it's also crazy that it's already December and what we're talking about in 2026 is a month away. And I mean, after we get through government funding, the elections are less than 10 months away. So this
Mhm.
is like after this month and after the holidays, like we are full swing in midterm mode and campaign reporting. And I mean, I think you can tell we're excited for it.
Yeah,
I
I'm excited. I'm excited to be on the road.
I think it's going to be really interesting with Trump going into the lame duck period of his presidency. If people campaign different, if
Mhm.
people start to split, kind of looking at what that post-Trump era looks like. I know that we talked about that with John Renish a few episodes back, the
Yeah.
Democratic strategist, and how the party kind of fell apart after Obama was president since he was such a strong leader. And I'm kind of wondering just what it'll look like in this what is seemingly kind of starting to be a post-Trump era. Not yet, obviously, he's still president for 3 more years, but somewhat starting. He's been in the scene since 2015. And so, I mean, we were what, 15, 14 then?
Oh,
So
yeah.
I think this will be really interesting for us to watch.
And I think one more thing I think before we head to our interview is that I think that tomorrow's special election is going to be very interesting, kind of what you said about how candidates are campaigning in the midterms and whether they're going to really emphasize on Trump or not. You know, Matt Van Epps, who's the Republican in the race for tomorrow, he won the primary handily, largely thanks to Trump's endorsement. But what a lot of Democrats and even some like independent, even some conservative strategists have been concerned about is whether or not Trump's endorsement is going to carry for the other GOP voters that
Yeah.
need to come out in this election to keep it
Yeah.
red. And
Mhm.
so, and again, special elections are different. They're not as indicative of what's going to happen in the midterms. Midterms are definitely different, especially it's an incumbent and things like that.
Turnout
But
is
I
much
am
smaller.
yeah, but I am curious to see, as we've always talked about, we're just such nerds. We love to see exit polling. Like I'm excited to see the exit polling because I want to know how much Trump's endorsement helped or hurt Van Epps in this race. Because I, you have to appeal to not just the Trump voters, because
Yeah.
a lot of Trump voters won't come out in midterms or specials. That's just how it goes.
Yeah. And
If the
without Trump on the
Democrat
ballot.
Right. And so if Democrats can really harness that power tomorrow, you could see a flip. I won't say it's like guaranteed. It's probably a little bit impossible, but I think that I'm curious to see whether or not Trump's endorsement is really going to play such a role in this, and if so, how? Because that will show, I think, for the midterms, and it will show for
Yeah.
Republicans, you know, what are we going to do in our campaign strategies to
Mhm.
keep this majority? Because as we saw, last month with the November elections, they were in blue states. Virginia was purple. I don't know. You could debate that, but like
Yeah.
that also showed that with the candidates that were aligning themselves with Trump did not do well.
Yeah, and I
And
mean the
so,
Democratic candidates made up multiple points in almost every race, every county.
yeah.
And so I mean I do expect tomorrow to see the Democratic candidate make up points that wasn't there for them in 2024.
Mhm.
How much that will be is I think what will be more telling. I think that we can both pretty confidently say that Democrats will make up points comparatively to Mark Green in 2024, but
Yeah.
how much that will be is what's up in the air, and I personally am very excited to see.
Yes, me too.
Yeah. Well, up next, we have a conversation with Congressman Adam Smith. Welcome to Capital Conversations. We are here today with Congressman Adam Smith over the Thanksgiving break. And you are the ranking member of House Armed Services. And obviously, we have a big week coming up. We are going to talk about NDAA, and that's coming up. Can you just tell us a little bit about what NDAA is and what your committee does with NDAA?
Sure, it's the defense authorizing bill, which basically gives us oversight over the Department of Defense and national security policy by the U.S. It's how to run the Pentagon, basically. This year, big focus, acquisition reform. How can we help the Pentagon buy equipment more quickly, more efficiently, more effectively, get the innovative technologies that they need? But it's oversight over a wide range of issues. And, we preside over, gosh, a roughly $900 billion budget. And so we also get into the money aspect of it in terms of programs to fund, support services for our service members, gosh, around housing, pay, a wide variety of issues. And then the other aspect of the defense bill is it is the biggest authorizing bill that passes, and it passes every year. We're on a 64-year streak right now. So a lot of other legislation from other committees tends to get attached to our bill. And then we have some piece of legislation that have multiple jurisdictions. So yeah, it has something to do with defense, but it also has something to do with commerce. So we wind up working with a lot of the other committees to put together what ultimately winds up being about a 4 or 5,000 page, $900 billion bill, which we're supposed to finish up in 7 days, 8 days.
Are you expecting any hurdles next week, or what are you expecting for this coming week? I know the House has been a little bit chaotic recently, but what is your outlook for this week?
Yeah, we're negotiating down about a dozen different items, and that functionality issue you raised of Congress. Thus far, within our process of the defense bill, we're still functioning. I spoke to the White House Ledge Shop today, about half dozen issues, very civil conversation. They want this, we want that, we can compromise here. The House and the Senate, the four leaders ranking and chair from House Armed Services and Senate Armed Services, we have met. Our staffs have been in conversations for months, and we're narrowing down, gosh, hundreds of different issues, and we're getting pretty close. So the process around the defense bill is still working in a way that many other aspects of the legislative process in DC are not.
And can you talk a little bit about that? And Lauren and I have discussed this so many times that we're living in just such an unprecedented era of Congress, especially for somebody who's working in the House, to see kind of the White House taking on some of the powers that the legislative branch typically has been in charge of. Can you talk a little bit about, like, in your experience as a House member, like how you've seen this kind of erosion of rules kind of, flow and what that means for the House's power when you're looking
Sure.
at things like NDAA or things like that?
I mean, there's always been a tension between the executive and the legislative branch, two co-equal branches of government, right? As they taught us in constitutional class. But yeah, I mean, the executive has some power that we don't have, and there's always been a bit of a struggle. What's different about the Trump era is really two things. Number one, I've never seen a House majority less willing to disagree with the president. President Trump has pretty much complete control over the House majority. They're not going to do anything that he doesn't want them to do, with very rare exceptions. And that undermines the ability of the House to push back. And once you've sort of set that precedent, sorry, the president will do whatever he wants to do, and the House isn't there to sort of push back on a wide range of policies. The second thing is Trump has been more aggressive than any executive in the history of this country in terms of pushing the envelopes of his power. We've seen this in a bunch of different areas. Tariffs. No one has ever levied this many tariffs on this many countries, an authority that is supposed to belong to the House and the Senate that the president has taken. He went aggressively after programs that had already been appropriated and funded by Congress. He froze money for, gosh, education, housing, university research, CDC, NIH, all stuff that presidents don't normally do. He's fired hundreds of thousands of federal employees. That just didn't happen. So we've seen this massive concentration, the executive branch taking big steps in terms of stepping outside of what I believe is the bounds of their constitutional authority. And yet we have a Congress, both the House and the Senate really, that have decided to just stand back and let him do it. And that undermines our authority. And then it sort of becomes the culture. We don't do it, he does it. And it really undermines, I believe, representative democracy.
And when you're looking at, so obviously the big news that kind of happened last week or the week before was that Marjorie Taylor Greene is resigning from Congress. And in her letter, and she's been kind of aligning with, I wouldn't say aligning, but kind of agreeing with some Democratic thoughts about the way that Trump is handling the country and the way that Speaker Johnson is handling the House. With her resignation, do you think that that is kind of a sign that members, just in general, both sides are getting frustrated that the House is not working the way that it's supposed to? And what is, in your opinion, the way to get out of that, to get out of this hole that they seem to be into?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I don't yet think we live in a Marjorie Taylor Greene centric universe. I think her decision is part of it. But
Mhm.
what's really happened in the last 2 months, a whole series of things that the Trump administration have done that are manifestly unpopular with the bulk of the American people, has caused people to wake up and go, hey, wait a second, what the hell's going on here?
Mhm.
Who's doing oversight? Who's not doing oversight? And it's a long list. I will not include everything here, but the Epstein files captured people's attention in a way that other issues didn't. I mean, the president had promised he was going to release these files. Congress asked him to. He refused, and there was a clash there that showed what the president was doing. Interestingly, his decision to unilaterally decide to knock down the East Wing of the White House without any approval seemed to have captured people's attention as well. But then you've got the boat strikes down in the Caribbean, where the United States military is killing people without any authorization from Congress to do so, has caught people's attention. The president threatening to go to war with Venezuela is waking people up. And then we've seen the impacts on the economy. I mentioned the tariffs. I mentioned some of the cuts that he put in place on various different programs. He cut a lot of energy programs, which is restricting our energy supply and helping to contribute to driving up those costs. He made cuts in healthcare programs that is driving up the cost of healthcare. His tariffs are driving up the cost of housing and food. So the policies that the Trump administration are implementing are starting to negatively affect the American people. And so aside from our inside baseball stuff about what's going on with the legislative branch and all that, your average person walking around my district and other districts is seeing the impacts of all of those things and going, hey, what's going on? And if
Mhm.
Congress, those of us who are elected to it, if our answer is, the president, he's up to some terrible stuff. It's like, well, wait a second, you've got a job, right? You're supposed to be part of this government and part of holding it accountable. And I think Marjorie Taylor Greene saw some parts of that, tried to push back ever so subtly, learned that doesn't work well in Trump world, and is having sort of an aha moment about something that, to my mind, should have occurred to her a hell of a long time ago. But yeah, that's part of this larger reckoning with the Trump presidency. Final piece of this, which I didn't even mention, the government shutdown.
Mhm.
I think Democrats did a really good job of messaging on that shutdown fight. This is what we're fighting for. This is what he's fighting for. The country saw a president who wanted to deny people food benefits that they qualified for and that we had the money to pay for in order to try to get political leverage over the Democratic Party. They're also now seeing increasingly the president using the Justice Department and now the Department of Defense to go out and persecute his personal enemies. All of this is coming to a head and making Trump very unpopular and causing people to say, might we not be able to do better than this? And shouldn't Congress be more involved?
Yeah, the government shutdown kind of leads me into our next question. I know that we just talked about the week ahead with NDAA, but we do have another government funding deadline come up on November or on not November, January
Yeah.
31st, excuse
Yeah.
me. But you talked a little bit about how the White House is pulling back already appropriated funds. We saw a rescissions package earlier this year. What is that fight going to look like in January for Democrats? Are we going to, I think a lot of people are wondering, are we going to be in the same spot that we were in on September 30th? Are we going to be in the same spot of a government shutdown? Where do you think that that's going to land, or those negotiations are going to land with 9 appropriations bills left to pass in the
Yeah.
next 2 months?
Well, we're not going to be in the same spot for two reasons. One's kind of inside baseball, so I'll leave that one for a moment. The bigger one is because I think the country has seen what's going on with Trump on these issues, and they are more sympathetic to it. There are consequences, as we have seen, to not just continuing to fund the basic functions of that it's not the whole government, of that portion of the government that's funded
Mhm.
by this. I think Democrats are going to say we're making our points and we'll litigate this issue as we head into the next year. So I think the dynamic has changed in that Trump is in a weaker position on the one hand, but on the other hand, we've kind of made our point. We've gotten people's attention. So we got to figure out how do we leverage the tiny, tiny, tiny little bit of power that we as Democrats have in this process, which is basically the filibuster in the Senate. The fact that they need Democratic votes to pass something beyond January 30th, at least under the current system, if they don't blow up the filibuster. So I think all of that, those arguments have shifted much more in the favor of the Democrats, and it changes a little bit how we want to continue to prosecute those arguments. Second thing is what you alluded to. We did pass 3 appropriations bills.
Mhm.
And there are now efforts to pass 4, 5, or 6 more. So we'll be talking about an even smaller portion of the government that needs to be funded beyond January 30th. But I think it's premature to say where that's going to be. We're going to be talking about healthcare between now and Christmas. We're going to be talking about these other appropriations bills that we want to pass, and how that comes out, where we're at when we come back the first week of January. then we'll begin to develop our strategy for how to deal with the January 30th deadline.
Yeah. Well, lots coming up. I know that we have a busy 3 weeks ahead of us and then a busy midterm year, but we really appreciate you hopping on for some of your time during your Thanksgiving week.
Anytime. Appreciate the chance. Hope you have a great holiday.
Yeah,
Yes,
you too.
thank
Thanks for
you.
joining us.
Thanks.
Welcome to our Q&A section, my favorite part. And we are going to be answering a question from Matt, which is, what can we expect the House to be working on in the next 3 weeks?
What can we not expect them to be
Yeah.
working on? I know that there's a lot coming up. We have the NDAA which is defense authorization. I think that it could come up as soon as this week in the House. And I think that they're going to try to put some other legislative priorities on that. I think that we're going to need to talk to some people once they get into town about what those could be. But I think that that's the biggest thing this week. I think that Republicans want to do a reconciliation 2.0. So I think that we should prepare for that. I mean, discharge petitions, if you want to talk more on some of the discharge petitions we'll see coming within these next 3 weeks.
Yeah, so we're going to see a discharge petition, which we had said earlier, Russia sanctions. And we had seen these discharge petitions just throughout the year as like tools of the minority. That's what Republicans had always called them. But you're seeing Republicans using them to circumvent leadership. And so I think what Johnson's going to run into in what we saw with the Epstein files and what we almost saw with proxy voting with Anna Paulina Luna, though they were able to work out a deal on that, is just with these discharge petitions. If these bills keep passing under these petitions, I think that it's going to highlight more of a problem that Johnson has with his own conference. And so I think that you're going to see one with Russian sanctions. Potentially, you could see one with the stock trading.
Yeah,
I think that members are hopeful that the bill just comes up with the
yeah,
support that it has. And there's been some conversations in leadership, but everything's been very like wishy-washy on when exactly it's going to come. But the Republicans and Democrats have said we will use a discharge petition. Like we are voting on this.
yeah.
So it's just they're like it's your move, whether we force you to do it or not. And so, and I think going back to Reconciliation 2.0, I think that that's going to be definitely a priority for next year because it's right before the midterms and leadership. Johnson himself has said that they want to get at least one more bill before the midterms to
Yeah.
really point to these legislative priorities that they've won. But I think that what we're going to see in the next 2 weeks is maybe the start of those conversations, kind of like at the beginning of the year in January, all the Republicans hightailed it to Miami to go
Cool.
talk about it. I think you're going to start to see that, at the end of this year, May, beginning of next year. But again, as we said earlier, beginning of next year is funding deadline. And so I think reconciliation will be kind of in the back pocket. So
Cool.
there's a lot of different things to be paying attention to. But I think that, the biggest one these next 3 weeks are going to be NDAA,
Discharge.
stock trading ban, Russia sanctions. Is there another one, I think? I don't know if I'm forgetting
I
one.
think that appropriators will be meeting. We'll be seeing
Yes.
like work to get these appropriations bills across the finish line. But I think that the big bulk of that work will come in January. But I do think that that'll be something to watch. We did see 3 appropriations bills pass with the CR, so there's 9 left. And they want to get those done by January 31st. So I think if they're going to get them done by January 31st, then they need to get on the ball this week.
Yeah. They need to be working on it, these next 3 weeks. They should not be waiting until January 6th when they come back. But they
Yeah.
love to go right up at the deadline. So maybe they haven't learned.
Yeah. Well, I think that that's all today. Thanks for watching Capital Conversations with Rachel and Lauren.
And as always, make sure to like and subscribe and leave comments and questions that you have for us and read at WashingtonExaminer.com.